I'm Bikram Bora. I teach history at Bahana College. This is the 7th technical session of the week-long national workshop on methodology in ethnographic study, organized by Bahana College and Sociology. Till date, we have had some extraordinarily engaging sessions. I hope this workshop has opened up new forms of understanding and new tools for our participants. So, building on the success of the last 6 sessions, we have another delightful session waiting for us. The topic is reporting ethnographic findings. And it is my privilege to welcome today's speaker, Dr. Swargajyoti Gohain, Associate Professor, Department of Sociology and Anthropology at Ashoka University, Sonipat, and erudite scholar of the Asian borderlands. Dr. Gohain has an illustrious career behind her. She did her master's from Delhi School of Economics and her PhD from Emory University in the United States. She has held postdoc positions at International Institute for Asian Studies in Leiden, Netherlands, and Institute of Economic Growth, Delhi. Previously, she has taught at IIT Kanpur. Her academic interest focuses on Indo-Tibetan borderlands, particularly on the Monpa community of West Kameng and Tawang, as well as Buddhist institutions and networks in the Himalayas and the Trans-Himalayas. Her research also encompasses state formations, borders, culture and politics, development, infrastructure, ecology, and politics of language. Her book, Imagine Geographies in the Indo-Tibetan Borderlands, was published in 2020 by Amsterdam University Press and has received widespread acclaim. So it is a great delight for me, personally and professionally, to have Dr. Gohain with us. I hope today's session will prove to be a great dialogue between the speaker and our participants. And we shall be able to have more questions and more ways of looking at ethnographic practices for our works and also for our communities. But before we begin, a request to the participants, please keep your microphones muted while the speaker is speaking. If you have any comments or queries, you may post them in the text channel of your Google Meet interface. Alternately, you may ask them to the speaker once they are done by raising your hand, of course. And your feedback link shall be provided towards the end of the session. So without further ado, please allow me to hand over today's proceedings to Dr. Gohain. Ma'am, over to you.
Thank you, Bikram, and soon to be Dr. Bikram Bora. I have had the pleasure and privilege to know Bikram as a research scholar in Jawaharlal Nehru University, and have also encountered your brilliant presentations in various workshops. So I'm really honored to be part of this forum where you were organizing this workshop, and thanks also to the organizer, Dr. Pankaj Bora, for inviting me to the IQAC workshop on research methodology on ethnographic study. I identify myself as a sociologist and anthropologist, and I think although these are two different disciplines in many educational institutions, but they're quite allied because sociology and cultural anthropology, they both use ethnography as a method of doing research. And ethnography is actually a very enjoyable experience for me personally because it allows me to interact with people, to understand situations from the ground level up. So I think it is a very interesting method requiring a lot of intuitive sense also. And it has also helped me understand many things and develop a lot of sensitivity towards what we work on, our research areas. So I'm very happy to be speaking on reporting ethnographic findings today. I will try and share my slides because the slides that I had sent earlier have been updated, some of the last minute changes. So the previous slides may not reflect the current changes. So if I'm allowed, may I please share my slides? I think the slides are being shared, right? No, right? Okay. No.
No, Ms. Kakoli Bora, if you could stop presenting, then we can share your slides.
Yeah. So if I share, I think this will override the previous share. All right. Yeah. All right. So I hope it's visible. The topic given to me, right. So thank you. So the topic given to me was reporting ethnographic findings. Again, if there is a problem with my audio, please feel free, because when I'm looking at the slides, I cannot see anything else. Let's see if I can open this. Right. So if, give me a second. Huh? Okay, no, I've enabled the video in a different window. So I may be able to see if there is any question from the audience. So right. So my topic is reporting ethnographic findings, and I found it very intriguing, because when we talk about doing ethnography, it is the first thing that comes to our mind is that ethnography is a written product, right? That this is what we end up writing. But ethnography is not only the written product. If ethnography, the term itself encompasses both the writing of it as well as the methods of it. And often, the two, the method and the written product, they are used interchangeably. And so this is the general understanding that I also go with. For example, when I'm asked, what do you do? What kind of work do you do? I do ethnography. So when I say I do ethnography, it doesn't only mean that I write the product of my work, of my research is ethnographic writing, but also when I am in the field, when I am doing my research, I do ethnographic work. So this is a broad label. It includes, it implies the genre of writing, which is based on the field work that we do as anthropologists. It implies experience near work. That means you have to experience from near, not from far, but from near the area of your research, the object of your research. And it also implies that you are spending some time in the field, that you've identified a particular field, which could be a geographical field like a village or a township. It could be a factory site. It could be a classroom. But it could also be certain networks, such as if you are studying business families, then these networks of business families, that also could be your field. But after you have demarcated a field, all right, which could be relational, which could be geographical, and then you also have to spend some time being in close proximity with that field. In fact, the field could also be an archive, right? A library. And of course, I'm happy to talk about that later. I don't want to digress too much, but the field can be anything. But as long as you've defined it and you're spending some time with near it, experience near, and then written about it from that experience-based writing, that is the genre of writing that we define ethnography as. It is also a set of methods, because unlike the historical method where identifying your sources, then decoding the sources, reading the sources becomes a very important method apart from oral history. And of course, Bikram, as a student of history, will be able to say more of this. But similarly, we also have methods in ethnographic work, which involves being in the field, doing interviews, oral histories, participant observation. So all these are methods, and they are overlap with what we broadly, they broadly, you can call them fieldwork, right? So fieldwork practices involve all these things: going to demarcating a field, spending time, long amount of time in the field, trying to participate in the cultures, in the processes, in the practices of that field, whether it is business families or agricultural fields or factory workers. So wherever the field is, trying and spending time with that, trying to get to understand the lifestyle of that particular setting. And then also the writing is also called ethnography. So it's a very broad term. Now, when we come to reporting ethnographic findings, for me, it means how do I represent the data that I've got in the field, right? The kind of relations that I want to write about based on my experience, based on my near observations in the field. How do I represent that? How do I present that to an audience, right? The audience could be an academic audience, the audience could be a non-academic audience, but that for me is what reporting ethnographic findings means. And there could be various forms of representing ethnographic findings. And there's something that I'd like to also talk about in terms of findings, but I'll hold that for a later slide. So we could have representations of various kinds. One is the formal field monograph, that is the academic product. It could also be an essay, it could be a book or an essay. It's in formal academic style. Then there could also be visual media, images, photographs. Nowadays, many publication houses allow photographic essays. Then films, ethnographic films are a great educational device that we use in classrooms. So those are also ways of reporting ethnographic findings. They're very different, of course, but they also are ways of reporting ethnographic findings. Ethnographic fiction or verse. Many ethnographers also take a creative turn, and they write ethnographic novels and they write poetry based on their experiences in the field. Then there are ethnographic non-fictions also, which could be travelogues, memoirs, diaries, and autobiographies. However, for this particular presentation, I'll be only focusing on the first, which is the formal academic monograph or book or essay. So ethnography, it's a writing genre. It's also the fieldwork practices. But we have to also understand that when we are talking about ethnography as fieldwork, then it also includes actually writing. So I just want to actually show that ethnography, even when we are thinking about the either as the process or a writing, both are very intertwined. Because when we are doing ethnography, when you're writing ethnography and when you're doing ethnography, then we have a set of methods in place, which could be the tools, that means the interviews, the conversations, the whatever we identify as our method, the oral history interviews, the life history narratives, the focus group discussions. I mean, there are a range of tools that the ethnographic method includes. But there is also something that is methodology, which includes the idea or the philosophy behind those methods. Because as researchers, when we think about what we want to research, the research question, right? We cannot proceed in any research project without first deciding what the research question is. I mean, the research question may change, definitely, but we need to have a research question. And when we write a research question, there is always more than just a research question there, right? There is always a background, theoretical background. There will be a review of literature on that subject, both conceptual literature as well as, area-based literature. And there will be attempts on our part to identify lacuna or ways in which the particular field that we have identified as ours, how that can help modify existing theoretical paradigms and frameworks. So all that includes that implies the methodology. And it is the methodology, the research question, that decides what our method will be. So what is it that we want to know, the research question, and what is it that will allow us to know what we want to know, right? So these are very interlinked things that we need to keep in mind when we are doing ethnography. I'm sure these have been covered in previous workshop sessions, but given that I'm going to talk about reporting ethnographic finding, the product, the end product, the written product actually is not separate from the process. And this is what this is the point that I'm trying to make, and hence I'm talking also about all these things. So conventionally, we may think that the written ethnography as a written product is the end process, right? Is something that we writing up after post facto, after the fieldwork process is over. And fieldwork is the process. So there is a doing and the writing of it, right? So there are two. One may be tempted to make that distinction. But again, the point I'm trying to make is that these are not separate from each other, because writing begins from the beginning of fieldwork. When we are in the field, we are this is a near experience, near practice. We are there in the field, we are observing people, but we are also translating those experiences into field notes every day, or maybe once in 2 days. We have to translate those experiences into field notes, because that contemporaneity, that immediateness of the field experience is very important to transcribe into writing, transform that into writing, if we are to do justice to what we are going to write about. And this again will come back to in later slides if necessary. And this is different from, I would say, journalism in that sense, because in journalism what happens is that, first of all, there is a time crunch, and so people have to chase a story, and so the writing may not happen during the process, in the sense that during the chasing story process, because there are so many leads to follow, there are so many things to conform, so it is a lot of activity in the in the process, and then later on there's just write-up. But anthropology or ethnography is different in that sense, because what happens is that we first of all have to spend a lot of time in the field, and secondly, when we are spending time, we also have, of course, time to write up. One thing is that you have the time to write up, and even if you don't have, you need to make time from your social life, if at all in the field, to write up. But also the fact that we should should not forget that immediacy of experience should be transcribed very soon. Otherwise, the first impressions that we have to record in order to give content, to make our content richer when we are writing up in a more formal way, that is missed if you're not making the full field notes immediately. So what that means is that field work is not, field work, there is a process, and then later writing is not so separate. Writing, field work can happen together. And again, conversely, field work also begins with the proposal writing stage. That means when you're writing the proposal, when you're identifying the research question, then we already have demarcated the field. And we may have also had prior experience of the field, which is why we want to go back to that particular field, to that particular location, ethnographic location, to do our research, right? So fieldwork begins, or maybe preempts, or precedes the proposal writing, the writing stage. So there is this kind of a cyclical and process or relation between ethnography and as writing and the fieldwork process, which is why it's so difficult to separate the two. Also, additionally, when we are writing field notes, a piece of advice that I had received when I was a student, and which stayed with me, and it's a piece of advice that I share also with many of my, many people that I who's also in the process of starting an ethnographic project, is that there are three types of folders one should ideally maintain when one is in the field doing field work. First of all, it's the immediate recording of data, whether it is you have written down interviews, whether you have recorded interviews and transcribed them. There's just data. But then another folder, right, which is about your reflections, your observations, which could be your sensory experiences. What was the lighting like, what was if it's a jungle, who was coming in, who was going in, what is the ecology, what is the physical environment, or also the other kinds of nuances that you have to capture, because these are very important ethnographic elements that should figure in any ethnographic text. So apart from all those recording or your own reflections and notes about the immediate environment, also what does certain things say which might not be articulated, but what you are inferring. So all those things, if you write down immediately after the interviews, those form part of your analysis. So analysis is happening not post facto after the field work, but simultaneously during field work, because it is only when the memory of the interview is very fresh in your mind, and you're taking notes and recording your own reflections at that time, and then when you come back to those reflections and notes later, that is when your analysis becomes stronger, because otherwise memory might fail us. And the third folder that's so important is that the broader theoretical significance, right? All these personal insights and analysis that we are making alongside the recording of data, what do they imply in terms of the broader connections? Whether the connections are comparative, comparing between what it means in terms of uh, how the locale compares with other locales. If we are studying factory setting, then how does it compare with other ethnographies of factory settings that already exist, and how the theoretical concepts that are available, how they can help in your analysis, or how your observations can contribute to further analysis in some existing theoretical field. So these are also notes that we should be doing in while in the field itself, because eventually that becomes part of the written ethnographic text. In fact, I'm sure this is a very, it's a classic text that everybody has been exposed to, Bronislaw Malinowski's Argonauts of the Western Pacific, who gave certain methods of doing fieldwork, which is, or certain, codes of doing fieldwork. Broadly, he has these very difficult terms, but basically they just mean very simple things. So the first thing he said was statistic documentation by concrete method, which basically means that as an ethnographer, one has to try and give an outline of the particular field location that one is studying. So what are the routine events? What are the seasonal events? Whether it is if it is a factory, if it is a village, what are the things that are, that are part of the life cycle of that particular field? And then the second is imponderability of actual life, which basically means just adding flesh to what is that, that skeletal outline that the first step requires us to do. So filling in details, small details, trying and recording small things. What happens when somebody is walking here? What happens when, some outsider is coming? And so all those, details. And then the third is corpus inscriptionium, which is basically recording verbatim statements, what somebody said, not just paraphrasing, but recording actual statements, because that can lead to a lot of ethnographic insights. But again, what this means is that fieldwork is a lot of writing. Writing is going on simultaneously during fieldwork. And reporting ethnographic findings is, the idea that one gets is something that happens post facto, right? But what I'm trying to say is that reporting goes on during fieldwork. We are in a constant stage, we have to be in a constant stage of reporting. And it is the way in which we are documenting our thoughts, our notes, making observations, pulling out larger theoretical connections. Those eventually inform the ethnographic text. How much time do I have? I don't know. I
Ma'am,
forgot to
you
ask.
have at least half an hour more, at least.
Okay, okay. I should have. So this is like 1 hour talk, right? And then,
Yeah.
okay.
Then
All
we
right.
go for the questions.
Okay. So I should have asked you the time before.
Not really.
Okay. Sorry. So I will just go on and I'll try and move slowly now. It's going a little fast. So now, if we are coming to reporting ethnographic findings, then there are two things that I would think about. One is, what are the ethics of writing? And second is the techniques of writing. Now, again, these are interconnected, because it is the ethics of writing that shapes techniques of writing, as I'll show in subsequent slides. I have some examples, I have some extracts of certain passages from books or essays where there is a deliberate effort by the ethnographic writer to present the data in a conscious, sensitive, and a sensitive way in certain cases, or to deliberately, use personal narrative, inserting their own self, like I did this, I thought this. So that kind of, style of writing. So that is a way of reporting ethnographic findings, which is informed by certain debates within anthropology and sociology that came up in the 1980s. And that is why the ethics and the techniques of writing are both mutually implicated. Now, I think both, I mean, this is also maybe common knowledge, and I'm sure this must have been discussed in previous sessions too. Um, but anthropology and sociology, they, in the sense that, uh, both are Western disciplines, right? They both arose in the 19th century. Sociology arose because it was concerned with the problems of modern society, and modern meaning Western society at that time. So the changes that were brought up, the sudden changes that were brought about by industrialization, by urban rapid urbanization, migration from rural to urban, newly or set up urban areas, the dislocation, the urban squalor, uh, uh, the um, chaotic, the political instability that some of the writers were seeing. So how the concern about how society can be preserved was something that was at the core of the origin of sociology. And anthropology's origin was more, there was a more colonial origin to anthropology, because anthropology also arose in the West to understand the non-West, because of the confrontation between the West and the non-West through colonial conquests. And there have also been allegations leveled that anthropologists, that they were at the service of the colonial rulers, because they were also from the same community many of the times, and they went and tried to understand different cultures that, as part of colonization, Western societies encountered. And in the process of writing about and reporting, the ethnographic findings at that time, many of these early anthropologists or ethnologists, as they were known sometimes at that, back then, they also ended up serving the colonial um, need of need to expand their power, because the more they knew about the people they were trying to administer, the better it was for them to also devise different techniques of administration. So there is this history, and that history uh, was overshadowed many anthropological writing styles, ethnographic writing styles, for a long time, without questioning, without thinking, without reflecting on the politics of representation. There were lots of ethnographies which are written. There were certain murmurs, there were certain level of disquiet, starting from the 1960s, 70s, but in the 1980s, it kind of exploded into a severe internal critique of ethnographic writing. So this internal critique of ethnographic writing, and I'm not seeing anthropology alone, because both sociology and anthropology both use ethnography and study of demarcating a field and doing research there. So this kind of ethnographic approach got a severe was subjected to a severe internal critique because of this history and unquestioned till then relations of power that were implied in ethnographic writing and had not been questioned till then. I mean, there had been writings, of course, but it's only in the 1980s that there was a systematic presentation of this critique of ethnography by ethnographers themselves. And this led to a lot of thought about how to report ethnographic findings, how to report, how one should be ethically reporting ethnographic findings, and how that ethical reporting also is informing the techniques of writing. So one has to be conscious. One can just go and write anything, or one can just go and question, draw any questions and ask questions like that. There has to be certain standards which are maintained in the process of doing fieldwork and in the process of writing, which are again not separate from each other. So from the beginning, because fieldwork is also fieldwork implies writing. So from the beginning, from the time of proposal drafting itself, from the time of identifying the field itself, there has to be this ethical question involved all the time. So a very common kind of critique or allegation, or as I mean, it's a prejudice against ethnography or anthropology or ethnography, whoever does ethnography, right, is that it's all stories. So people assume that ethnographers are storytellers. So there are two things here. Uh, Fine, I mean there are stories, of course, because when you're telling stories of people in various relations, people in relations of power, people in and relations with non-human entities, people in relations with technology, people as historical products, I mean people in various relations with each other, we are telling stories of people. So the question that one may encounter is that, how do you convince the reader um, that you are not making up the stories that you're telling, right? So that's one often unsaid but sometimes explicitly stated um, mm, question that we face as ethnographers. And the other question is more internal, more kind of an internal thing that we have to ask ourselves, that how do we prevent ourselves from not making up stories. So one is, how do you convince readers that you are not making up stories, and the second is, how do you prevent yourself from not making up stories. So how do you convince the reader that you're not making up stories is about the techniques of writing, right? And then how do you prevent yourself from not making up stories? That's the ethics of writing. And again, the techniques of writing and ethics of writing are again um, connected. So many people have answered that anthropology is not just description; it's theoretical storytelling. As in, um, what I'm saying now is a repeat of the points that I've already made earlier. That ethnography is not just going out there and telling a story, but we locate it within a theoretical framework. We try and ask the research question in a way that contributes to the larger theory. And then the second thing that one has to be clear about is that anthropology or ethnography cannot have conclusive findings. So yeah, we do slip into using the word findings, but should not be seen as conclusion, but just interpretations. Now, when we say interpretations, does that reduce the truth value of the finding? Does it reduce the truth value of what we are saying, or does it just mean that it's a different kind of expectation that we should have, right? And again, this will take us into the debates between subjectivity and objectivity, and I'm happy to take this later if necessary in the question answer round. But the point I'm trying to make here just is that we should not claim to have conclusive findings, that okay, I'm writing about a particular village, this is why people of X village do. I mean, that cannot be a statement that I can make, because first of all, uh, there are many different kind of people in the village, and the village itself is so internally there are so many differences there. And also, the other problem with this statement is that it ahistoricizes the situation. This is why people of X village do, means that they have been doing this for eternity and they will continue doing it for eternity. I mean, that's also kind of an ahistoric statement. So these are not the kind of statements or findings that we should report, but rather interpretations, which could also vary depending on who I'm talking to, who in the Y, among the Y people in X village that I'm talking to, and also time. So if something is true for a particular period of time, may not be true for another time, because things change, things are changing depending on how the world changes, how the relations of that particular village with the nation, with global um, with the global community changes. So all these things also are subject to change. So we cannot have conclusive findings, but interpretations that are very context based. And anthropology is defined, therefore, as an interpretive science. Anthropology, which I'm sometimes using it as a kind of an interchangeably with ethnography, because anthropology has been defined only or mainly by ethnography. But nowadays, because ethnography or qualitative research is used by many disciplines like political science, sociology, of course, very much, biology also, many biologists use ethnography. So ethnography, whether it's no, you whoever is using it, it's supposed to be an interpretive science, right, which is based on some such kinds of interactions where you are talking to certain people and then trying to analyze the situation. There is a famous anthropologist called Clifford Geertz who used the word thick description, and he opposed it to thin description. So thin description is description, just kind of a recounting the what had happened. But thick description is more than that. It tries to analyze why something happened and what is the context inserting in which that particular event happened, and trying to understand, compare and contrast with between that and other events. So that analysis is what makes thin description into thick description. And the other thing about such anthropological facts is that they are always intersubjective, which and involving a process of cultural translation. In fact, there was an anthropologist called Paul Rabinow who has defined it in a very nice way, how anthropological facts are different from other kinds of facts which we can just observe from a distance, right? Let's say, think about a lab, and we have put some fluid in a tube, and we have put some other element in that tube, and then we can just stand outside and observe what are the reactions that are happening inside that tube in a lab. But so the distance between the observed, which is that liquid and elements, the reaction, the chemical reaction, so the distance between the observed and the observer is absolute. There is no interaction. In fact, interaction is a problem because that can lead to contamination. But in the case of ethnography, interaction is a must. So we can only get facts by talking to people, by interacting with people, by trying to understand a particular field through this kind of interaction, which necessarily involves some form of cultural translation. I have a questionnaire which I will go and ask people the different questions, and then people will respond not in a free way, right? We are not asking people to give a monologue. We are asking questions that are quite targeted questions, right? Even if they are improvised during the process, we still have a rough kind of a knowledge idea of what kind of questions, and people respond to those questions. So if I want to ask something about the state of roads in Jorhat, I will ask, so what are the state of roads? How has the highway construction been like? What are the kinds of changes that have happened? So people will respond to these questions, and the responses of the questions are then the anthropological facts. So there's a intersubjective understanding, right? There is a meeting of grounds or meeting of minds. I am asking the questions. I have already formulated the question. The interlocutor, the informant, is responding to those questions, is interpreting the questions in their own way and responding based on what they are interpreting. I am interpreting what the respondent is giving me and packaging it into the concepts and theories that I have at my disposal. So it's a kind of an intersubjective dialogue, and it is this dialogical way through which anthropological facts are made. They're not something that is just observed from a distance. It's very experience near, intersubjective, and it involves this process of cultural translation. This is these are all about the ethical process, and when we are asking questions in anthropology, we have to be very mindful that we are not putting things into people's mouths. We are not asking leading questions. We are not asking people questions that we already know the answers to, and we are basically just trying to get confirmation. And we should be very aware that when we are asking questions, we are not trying to force people into answering. So do you think the roads are really bad in Jorhat? So if I'm asking a question in that manner, people, even if they have a different idea, they'll say, yes, roads are really bad. So that those are the ways in which we should not be asking questions. This is because depending on the way we ask the questions, the responses are also obtained. So these are also the ethics of writing. What we will write depends on how we are asking questions. Then the other thing about ethnography is that it does involve a lot of hierarchy. Not everybody is in a position to go and ask questions to anybody and expect to get answers. Even if it is even if it is somebody who's maybe doing research in an institution, the researcher will have to carry certain identifications, right? Some kind of a certificate or some kind of a letter from the institution which will invest authority on the researcher to do research. Otherwise, why will people answer? And that itself means that there is some hierarchy involved in ethnographic work. So not everybody can ask questions and expect to get answers. And this is, of course, a bigger problem in earlier ethnographic works when the scale was very much tilted in favor of the ethnographer who was who in the earlier days happened to be white, happened to be a male, and happened to be somebody also with some amount of money to be able to do that long-term ethnographic work and write up. So how can one be conscious about these problems of representation and not assume that whatever is being said is being said only because there is some kind of a charisma in the ethnographer which is making people answer. There is, of course, all these powerful relations which are there in the ethnographer, which does which allows this kind of a dialogue to happen. Even if it is a researcher there who will still carry the institutional backing when one is doing research, or some kind of a collective backing, maybe as part of some government agency or non-government organization. There will always be some kind of an institutional backing which will invest that power of representing on the researcher. And one has to be conscious about this relation of power which is there in ethnographic work, and not use this to one's advantage, and try and be ethical, that one should not write just about anything. So basically the question about why I should not make up stories, right? Why I should not prevent myself from making up stories. So this is about that there are certain relations of power that are there in ethnography, and one should be aware of this and sensitive of this and not use it to one's advantage. Although one may have the power of representing doesn't mean that one can write or say just about anything. So there are certain ethical challenges of doing ethnography. They have been identified. There are many concepts also out there which encapsulates some of these ethical challenges. One is that reflexivity. One that there are certain biases that one carries into the field. There might be certain ideological biases. There may be certain class biases. There may be certain gender biases. There may be certain ethnic and racist biases. And one uh, is an individual who grows up as part of different social networks, and so some biases may be there in us. But how in doing ethnography can we be conscious of these biases and try and avert them as much as possible? And so reflexivity is a word which is used to differentiate it from reflection, which can be post facto. I reflected about some certain things, but reflexivity is something that we should cultivate from the proposal writing stage, from the time we write proposals to the time we draw up questions, so that we should be careful not to bring in these biases in the questions. from the way in which we ask questions, not to unnerve people, but also to get fair responses as much as possible. And also while writing up, one has to try and reduce the power hierarchies that field work involves. I'm going to talk about that again in some of the later slides. Positionality is that everybody has a particular social position, and one has to be aware that one's positionality can also influence the kind of questions we get. And so one should not claim to be to have all the knowledge that is out there. As a woman, as somebody from Northeast India, who's maybe, if one I have to work in a North Indian context. So what are the things that people may choose to answer or not answer, depending on how they see me. Or ethnocentrism, that means I should not have the feeling that what I know is the best, and what my values are the best, or what I've been trained or exposed to so far are the best. So if one has that kind of a value judgment, then of course one can't be fair in doing ethnography. Then there are all the ethical issues of consent and confidentiality, which are very much part of research. And then the last is not exhaustive list, but what I can cover here: ethnographic authority. How does one, account for one's own presence in ethnographic writing? Now, this is a very big dilemma, because this is something that's at the core of how to convince the reader that what I'm writing is not just stories. So somehow it was initially, in the early days, it was felt that bringing the I into ethnographic writing will somehow, lessen the scientificity, the scientific value of the writing. So many of the earlier the earlier works, ethnographic essays, ethnographic, the ethnographic books, they tried to take the I, the presence of the ethnographer, away from the book. It was as if introducing the I would make it more subjective. And since ethnography in the beginning was trying to be very objective, trying to mimic the methods, the ideals of the natural sciences. So the way people wrote about was also to reduce one's presence from the work itself. But this has been a very futile exercise. So many people, and of course the fact that we now know, we now understand the dialogical nature of anthropology. The anthropology facts itself are, collected through this kind of not collected, are constructed through such kind of a dialogic and intersubjective process. So to pretend that the I is superfluous is also actually a false kind of concern. So it has now it's now common practice to also include the I in writings and not think of it as less scientific. I'm just going to skip to this particular slide because I see that I have now only 5 minutes. So then how do the ethics of writing influence the techniques of writing? Right? So the techniques of writing, there can be different styles, but I'm using John Van Manen's book, Tales of the Field, on writing ethnography, to see how people can write about the findings in different ways. He has 3 genres, he has 3 styles in this book: realist styles, confessional tales, impressionist tales, and autoethnography. Autoethnography I've added because it's a still emerging genre. So realist tales are basically a style of writing which is a very direct, matter of fact way of talking about what transpired in the field, and it's more in the lines of what you would encounter in natural science journals. Confessional tales, where the I, that I as in the ethnographer, is very much present, and the focus is on the ethnographer rather than the the people written about, or the field setting, and different ideologies, different uh, internal perceptions of the ethnographer. That is the genre that confessional tales means. Impressionist tales is a way of writing about the field, which is very a personal style. One can be creative, one can be dramatic, one can be one can write very atmospheric, in a very atmospheric way. So these are different genres of writing about the field. And the fourth is autoethnography, where one is inserting oneself into the ethnographic writing, using one's own experiences to unfold a particular uh, conceptual problem. So these are different techniques of writing, and I just wanted to give you some examples before winding up. If you look at the list of illustrations in this book called African Systems of Kinship and Marriage by Radcliffe Brown and Daryl Ford, very early, I mean, early 20th century ethnography, you'll see that the images are captioned in a particular way, which you will not, or actually you should not find nowadays, given that there has been so much internal critique of anthropology. So number 3, Zulu man's terms for cognates. Now this is something that's will not be in a caption now, because it's, first of all, it's homogenizing Zulu man. Zulu man, who everybody, I mean, there's just a kind of a broad word, homogenizing the whole Zulu society. So, and it's also very static, right? Things also change. That's not implied there. What you will find nowadays will probably be the name of the individual. You'll say, okay, somebody X addressing Y with whom he shares, a kind of more detailed caption. So this is the kind of a realist style of writing. Here again, you have another realist style of writing by Margaret Mead, Mountain Arapesh, talking about the mountain Arapesh in a very uh, scientific way. So you look at, the first lines, very matter of fact recounting of what Arapesh do by another anthropologist called Margaret Mead. Here you will find in this third example by a book called Amma's Healing Room, Gender and Vernacular Islam in South India by Joyce Flukiger. Here you will find focus on a particular character in the book, which is also, you will see that it is also realist, but it's also a mixture of, realist and impressionistic, because it is trying to recount in third person what is happening, but it is also impressionistic because it's focusing on a particular individual, and it is also trying to bring the personal style of the author in there. Again, in the realm of the Diamond Queen, Marginality in an Out of the Way Place by Anna Singh, who's worked on Indonesia. Now, if you look at the first sentence, you'll realize that this is a confessional style of writing. The author is reflecting on why they use the word Meratas, although, identifying people by these common terms may be called homogenizing, and yet the author is choosing. So it's a reflection on one's personal choice, right? So it's a confessional style. Here, this is In the Shadows of the State by Alpa Shah, which is a ethnography of Maoist, villages that have Maoist connections in Jharkhand. So it is a mixture of confessional style and also impressionistic style. It's like a novel. If you read the book, it's like a novel. Very minimum theoretical references. Most of the theory is in the footnote or in the later appendix. Reads like a novel. So it's an impressionistic form of reporting ethnographic data. This last example, or maybe the second last, is by Michael Taussig, called The Magic of the State. It's a purely impressionistic style of writing, recording the impressions of the ethnographer as, author, as creative writer. It's a very, you'll see it will look like a kind of a creative piece of creative writing. So there's drama in it. The sentences are not regular. It's more like how a novel is written. So it's a very impressionistic style of writing, and these are all ethnographic works. They're all different styles of ethnographic works. And the last is a autoethnography. It is by uh, Iranian person called Shahram Khosravi, who's written this essay on borders. So he's talking about his experience of using the help of people, middlemen, to who smuggle people out, basically human trafficking. But basically, he's using the middle help of the middlemen to move from Iran first to Pakistan, then to India, and then he goes to the West. And now he's a professor in Stockholm. But he is talking about his own experiences to unravel the concept, or to critically talk about concepts of citizenship and borders and migration. So it's an autoethnographic style of writing. So basically, these are all different forms of reporting or writing about the ethnographic experience. And any one single essay or book is not just one style. There are a mix of styles. So one can mix realist styles. There will be certain paragraphs which are realist styles. Then there will be certain paragraphs which are confessional. And then there are certain paragraphs where one might want to explore one's creative side and introduce some drama. And it's possible to include all these things in the same work. And each style serves different purposes, right? So one style will be, the confessional style will allow you to talk about your own perceptions and ideologies and ideas and in relation to the field. So that these are all combinations of different styles, one which one could use to represent the ethnographic the field. And then, of course, I just mentioned that there are other ways apart from writing ethnography. There can be films also. The first film that you see on the left is by Jenny Chio, about ethnic tourism in China. And the second one on the right, by Irene Mario Garigliano and Alessandro Cartosio, Bora, is on Kamakya temple in Assam. There could also be ethnographic fiction and verse. So this is a part of an epic poem, epic novel written by Valentin Daniel, who on the Sri Lankan experience, and he wrote it in the form of a verse. So these are other genres or ways of reporting ethnographic finding, which I just wanted to present to you. But this is the end. This is my last slide. So I'd like to stop here, and I'll also stop sharing. It feels as if I've been talking a lot.
No, I wish we had more, but anyway, thank you, ma'am. It's always been a pleasure listening to you, and today was no different. A very riveting session, densely packed with a lot of concerns. So the speaker today talked about how ethnography is a written product and implies both writing and the method itself, and experience that comes with it. Ethnography is a set of methods which includes the field and the practices that are imbibed in it. Representing the observations in the field can have various forms with creative turns, such as formal monographs, visual media, fiction, and non-fiction. The speaker provided examples of each towards the end, as we saw. However, for the sessions, he focused on the methods of formal ethnographic writing. Methodology, as she implied, includes identifying the question, the background, the lacuna, and what the research allows us to bring to the table in terms of modifying the paradigm. While one may be tempted to make a distinction of ipso facto and post facto processes of fieldwork and writing, but writing begins with fieldwork itself, as the immediacy of experiences are transcribed. Conversely, fieldwork may also preempts or precedes the process of preliminary writing. The speaker also went in detail about the technical logistics and the know-how of managing data, nuances, inferences, and sensory experiences during fieldwork, and how to locate themselves in terms of the broader theoretical connections. What is she focused on methods espoused by Bronislaw Malinowski in his magnum opus, with reference to statistical documentation, recording mundane details, and recording things as verbatim. She also focused on how the ethics of writing shapes the techniques of writing themselves. The issues, as she sums up quite succinctly, is how do you convince people that you are not making up stories, and how do you prevent yourself from making up stories? And also, the crux of the matter is, as part of an interpretive discipline and intersubjective dialogue with its own forms of hierarchies, ethnography may not have conclusive findings, and yet it doesn't diminish the true value of the findings themselves. At the same time, reflexivity as an act should make the researcher themselves be conscious of their biases, baggage, and positionality in terms of the locale and in terms of the relationship power. So with that, we are now open for questions and comments. Participants may post their comments or questions in the text channel of their Google Meet interface in the chat box. Alternately, you may raise your hand and direct your questions to the speaker verbally. So we'll wait for questions. While we wait for the questions to come, if there are any, ma'am, I have a question actually, which actually bothered me for a long time. So, as students of history, we often have to work within a very strictly ordered and regimented confines of the institutional archives. So, how does the researcher, as a conscious subject, locate themselves there in the archives? When conventional historical narratives, if not all, they tend to anonymize the author for the sake of the text. So, my question is perhaps taking cue from what you have said about ethnographic authority. How do historians see themselves as subject in terms of the archives as their field? So, basically, how do historians claim the I in history, or should we?
This is also an ethical question, which sometimes I think historians doesn't have any immediate need to address. Uh, More because the archives, as long as they're pertaining to people who are not there anymore. So how do you talk about a dialogue with people? So your dialogue is with not with the people but with the text. So in that sense, this there is of course a dialogue, but it is not the kind that we have in the case of ethnography, where both the researcher and the people, the informants, are contributing to the knowledge that is coming out. It's the subjective experiences of both that are constructing the anthropological fact. Interpretation is both ways. It's dialogical in that sense. In the case of historians studying archives in a regular way, the interpretation is the agency of the historian. The texts are not speaking back in that sense, not actively in the way that the informant in the ethnographer's case would be. But if you are, I'm sure you also know about this thing, so I'm not going to teach history to a historian. That's overreaching my own standards. But in the subaltern studies school, you have a way, of course, of trying to bring in the agency, of trying to revive the agency of the subaltern from the archives. Then you have the oral history methods, where the dialogical method is more, the kind of dialogical method present in ethnography is more apparent. But in the case of, let's say, Mughal history, um, how much, what is the imperative of trying to introduce the I in a historical text? I think so. The question is, how much is it needed when the interpretation is not really right doing that kind of dialogue? You're not letting the text speak back in that sense. Now, whether you should let the text speak back is another question, right? It's a very interesting question. Maybe if I think more about it, I will have a maybe clearer answer. But at the moment, this is what I think is the answer.
we do not seem to have any more questions. So if we do not have any more, then I think we may proceed to the conclusion of today's session. Thank you, ma'am. And thank you all the participants for making the session a success. And on behalf of Bahana College, my most sincere gratitude to Dr. Gohain for accommodating us in her schedule. So as promised, she delivered one of the most scintillating addresses of this workshop till now. So we hope to hear from you again in the future, ma'am. As for our participants, we shall see you again tomorrow. And also your feedback link is available in the text box. So with this, I formally conclude today's session. Thank you, and we shall meet you tomorrow again.
Thank you to everyone, the participants for so patiently listening, and thank you, Bikram, soon to be Dr. Bikram Bora, for anchoring this program and for the wonderful question, which is very thought provoking. Actually, it's got me thinking more about the onus on historians. Thanks for having me.
Thank you again.
Bye bye. Bye bye.
Participants, please wait. There is an announcement.
Dear participants, the assignment for today is that you have to download the SPSS software, and we have provided this in the assignment link. You will find it at 6 p.m. And there is one data set enclosed with that assignment. You have to download that one also. The second session on 10th of June will be a hands-on session where we have to operate the SPSS. So try to join the session using your laptop or desktop, install SPSS in that laptop, and try to use the dataset that we have attached in the assignment. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Pankaj Bora, sir. And with this, we conclude today's sessions. Participants may leave.